When people talk about things like immigration or voting, just protesting, crime, or just due process, there's always one question that comes up again and again, and that is, do constitutional rights apply only to citizens? And so the too long didn't watch aspect of it would be the answer is no. And so those of you that got your answer, I guess I'll catch you on the next video. But the truth is, the answer is, of course, a little more complicated than that because there are some rights that are specifically tied to citizenship, and there are other rights that are more apply more broadly to people under the authority of the United States government, and that's a really important distinction. I'm just a small-time high school civics and history teacher talking about civics questions that I think that are important, and this is another one of those. And so I want to kind of get into this a little bit more in depth. Now, when we look at how this works, the Constitution in its wording doesn't always use the word citizen. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. A lot of times it will use the word person. And so if we look at, for example, the 14th Amendment, the second of the Reconstruction Amendments, 13, 14, 15, the 14th Amendment begins by defining citizenship. And it says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens. And that sentence really kind of tells us, well, who is a citizen? But within that same amendment, it also says that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. And then it also says that no state shall deny any person the equal protection of the laws. Not any citizen, any person. Now, the Fifth Amendment, one of the part of the Bill of Rights here, also uses very similar language. And it says that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Fifth Amendment really applied to more federal aspects of it. The 14th would go on to make that distinction amongst the states as well. But anyway, again, we see here in the Fifth Amendment, there's not no citizen, it's no person. And so that language is really important because it means the government does not get to say, you're not a citizen, so basic legal protections don't apply to you at all. Now, that doesn't mean that citizens and non-citizens have identical rights in every situation because, they really don't. Like, for example, voting in federal elections is a citizenship right. You have to be a citizen. And so is serving on juries is generally tied to citizenship. Or running for public offices requires citizenship. Being president requires being a natural-born citizen. Citizens also have to secure rights, to secure a right to remain in the United States when non-citizens do not. We really have, I'm sorry, I probably misspoke there. Citizens have a secure right. Like we're here in security. Non-citizens don't have that benefit. So when it comes down to it, citizenship absolutely matters. But citizenship is not the same thing as personhood under the Constitution, because a non-citizen accused of a crime still has constitutional protections. The government still has to follow legal procedures. The government cannot simply imprison someone, seize their property, or deny basic fairness by saying, that person's not a citizen, so therefore, there you go. Now, that principle, in and of itself, has very important historical roots. There's one really important case, this federal case here. It's called Yick Woo v. Hopkins, and it's from 1886. Yick Woo was a Chinese immigrant in San Francisco, and the city had a laundry ordinance that looked neutral on paper, but was enforced almost entirely against Chinese laundry owners. The Supreme Court ruled that the Equal Protection Clause applies to all persons within a state's jurisdiction, not just citizens. And that matters because it showed that constitutional protection against discrimination enforcement could apply to non-citizens. And then we get about 100 years later, nearly a century later or so, and in the case of Plyler v. Doe, the Supreme Court considered a Texas law that tried to deny public education funding for children who were not legally admitted into the United States. The Supreme Court ruled that undocumented children were still persons under the 14th Amendment, and they could not be denied equal protection in that way. Again, then, The point was not that citizenship does not matter. The point was that non-citizens are still persons. More recently, these questions have become kind of central again because we've seen birthright citizenship get challenged and upheld in the Supreme Court. We've seen like non-citizen voting has been used as a political issue, even though federal elections are solely limited to citizens. Immigration detention has raised due process questions, of course. You have asylum rules, deportation procedures, and border enforcement that all raise hard questions about the relationship between national sovereignty and constitutional limits. So, for the sovereignty side of things, a country has the power to decide who may enter, who may stay, and who may become a citizen. That is part of sovereignty. But in a constitutional republic, government power is not unlimited. Even when the government is enforcing immigration law, it still has to operate under constitutional rules. Due process, it doesn't always mean that someone will win their case. It does not mean every non-citizen has a right to remain in the United States. It doesn't mean that immigration enforcement is unconstitutional. Due process means the government must follow fair legal procedures before taking away life, liberty, or property. And of course, that distinction is important because sometimes people talk about constitutional protections as if they are rewards for citizenship, but many constitutional limits because of what government is. Constitution is not only a list of benefits for citizens, it's also a rule book for limiting government power. That's why the wording is so important. When the Constitution says citizen, well, then the citizenship matters. When it says person, personhood matters. So when it says the people, courts may have to ask who is part of the political community that's being protected in that context. And that language just isn't, hibbity skibbity or random or something like that. Different words do different work. And this is also why immigration debates need careful language. It is fair to debate border policy. It is fair to debate asylum rules. It's fair to debate things like visas and deportation, work authorization, public benefits, naturalizations. All of those things are legitimate policy debates. But it is not accurate to say that non-citizens have no constitutional rights at all. They may not have every right citizens have, and their rights may depend on location, legal status, and just overall context. A person outside the United States seeking entry does not stand in exactly the same legal position as someone already inside the country. And so, for example, a lawful permanent resident does not stand in exactly the same position as someone with a temporary visa. And someone in immigration proceedings doesn't stand in exactly the same place as a citizen voter. But the basic principle still remains, it's still in place. The Constitution often protects people, not only citizens. That idea should matter to everybody. Because once government can ignore due process for one unpopular group, the habit of ignoring limits can spread. And so a republic is not measured by how it treats the popular, the powerful, or the fully included. It's also measured by whether government must follow the law when dealing with people who are vulnerable, disliked, accused, undocumented, detained, or just politically easy to, dismiss. So, once again, do constitutional rights apply only to citizens? No. Some rights belong specifically to citizens, but many constitutional protections apply to persons. Citizenship defines membership in the political community. Personhood limits what government may do to human beings under the government's authority. And that distinction is not some kind of loophole. It is one of the foundations of constitutional government. And I found that to be another important civics question worth asking today, and hopefully providing some answers. So feel free to share, spread the word. Appreciate it. Enjoy the day.